So the article I analyzed was titled Concussions Among United States High School and Collegiate Athletes. I'm Logan McCarthy. An estimated 300,000 sports-related traumatic brain injuries, predominantly concussions, occur annually in the United States. Sports are second only to motor vehicle crashes as the leading cause of traumatic brain injury among people aged 15 to 24 years old. This study was conducted on 100 United States high school and 180 collegiate athletes. I put most of my focus on high school athletes. Concussions represented roughly 9% of all high school sports-related injuries. Among both college and high school sports, football and soccer had the highest rates of concussions. In high school sports played by both sexes, girls sustained a higher rate of concussions, and concussions represented a greater proportion of total injuries than in boys. So as I said, I put most of my focus into high school sports, and I also stated how high concussion rates for athletes at any level were both football and soccer, girls more often than boys. Based on the national estimate, the majority of concussions resulted from participation in football, roughly 41% of all concussions, and followed by girls soccer with roughly 22%, followed by boys soccer, and then girls basketball with roughly 10% of all concussions coming from girls basketball. The rate of concussion was higher in competition than in practice for all sports except high school girls softball and volleyball. And by this I mean the concussions came from games more often than practices. So football has the highest risk of concussion at any level. The highest proportion of concussion injuries occurred during running plays and resulted from contact with another person. More specifically, tackling and being tackled were responsible for roughly 68% of the concussions in football. Linebackers suffered almost 41% of all concussions among defensive players, and concussions represented a higher proportion of their total injuries than for all other defensive positions combined. Running backs sustained nearly 30% of concussions suffered by players in offensive positions. However, no significant differences by offensive positions existed. So here I focused on girls and boys soccer because that was the second highest proportion of concussions. So girls had a higher rate of concussion than boys, and concussions represented a greater proportion of total injuries among girls than it did in boys. The risk factors for concussion in soccer differed significantly by sex. Among both boys and girls soccer players, the activity most frequently associated with concussions was heading the ball, just as you see in this picture right here. Contact with another person resulted in a greater proportion of concussions in boys than in girls, and contact with the ground and contact with the soccer ball were related to a significantly greater proportion of concussions in girls than in boys. Another risk factor associated with concussions was goaltending, with nearly 22% of injuries to goalkeepers being concussions, compared with 11% of injuries to other positions. So, for the lack of a better term, this is a graph that says how they received the concussion. So as you see in football, soccer for both genders, and basketball for both genders, along with wrestling, most of the concussions happen from contact with another person. But in baseball and softball, they come from contact with equipment. Each sport has a different level for proportion of concussions with contact with playing surface, but that just comes with the sport and how it's played. So I think that this experiment was done the best way possible. The only way I've seen improvement in this experiment is how recently it was conducted. This was done approximately 10 years ago. I think it would be very cool to see this exact experiment repeated now to see if improved equipment in sports like football has caused a decrease in concussion rates, like the increasing of the safety of helmets, and see if that has had an effect on the rates of concussion. I thought it was very interesting to read about the different findings between genders and between different levels of sports.